Right. We'll get started. I want to say welcome and thank you for everybody coming. This is a long time coming, and I'm really glad you're here. I'm going to explain a lot of things about the process and where we are in the process and that sort of thing. But your being here is the key part of the process. So that's our primary goal. So thank you for that. Before I get started, though, I'm going to get all the commercial messages out of the way early so it won't be interrupted. So Jean Gunner's going to give us a
Thank you.
commercial.
Here to tell you about Forest and Trail Association's upcoming soiree. It's our biannual event. It's coming up in 9 days, and you won't want to miss it. It's purely for fun. You come here for all this great business and participation. This is your reward. So what we're offering is delicious food, a cash bar, raffle of locally made goods, live music, and a very entertaining and engaging guest speaker. And all the information you need for purchasing tickets is on this flyer. And if you have any further questions, my email address is at the bottom. So I'm going to ask you to pass these around. Please take one, and there's going to be a stack of them on the table, and I hope to see you there.
Great. Thank you, Jean.
Yep.
So welcome to our community forum on the new general plan. And this is the first in a series of forums on major sections of the new general plan. The section we're going to talk about is the natural resources and open space section. And this is being televised, as you can tell. It's being recorded so that folks can watch it later, but also so we can capture your comments and input. You should all have a form, a four-sided, two-page form, and there's pens and pencils over there if you need it, and if you need a form, they're over there also, for your feedback and comments. We've also got to make sure we don't miss anything. If there's something we can't address, or we'll capture them here as well. So we're trying to capture your comments and input. So that's a big part of the process. We've already been going through a lot, and we'll explain that. If you're watching at home, then you can download an outline of what we're going through, and also that same comment form. And there's instructions on it how to email it back. But you can also post it to the town hall, or you can drop it by the town hall. And the other thing is, we're going to try to work without a microphone, but if we need a microphone, if anybody can't hear something, there's a microphone here for folks to speak. So what is a general plan, or a master plan? This slide explains the basic idea. The state requires every community in Massachusetts to have a master plan or a general plan, and ours was last published in 2001, so it's outdated, it's time, and the planning board is responsible in every community. The planning board is responsible for the generation and the production of the plan. The two key things about the plan: one is the process itself, and the input and the communication is a huge benefit and a real asset to the town. The document itself has to result in becoming a useful document. And so we've done a lot of work, and we'll show you, I think, really good examples of that, of making sure that it is useful. The idea is that we say, where do we want to be in 30 years, and how are we going to get there? And then the other aspect of that is every board and committee and group working on things in the town. We're mostly volunteers. We've got some terrific professionals in the town, but as a group, when we're making decisions, we want to make sure that the decision we're working on today is going to steer us in that direction we want to go. And if not, we need to think hard about why we're making that decision. So it should be a real useful tool going forward. Where we are in the process. In 2014, we did a townwide survey that went to every home in Sherborn, about 1,500, and we got, I think, a really great number back about 660, I think it was 658 back. So we've already got a lot of feedback, and that's become the basis of where we want to be and who we want to be and that sort of thing. And that then was referred to by the working groups. There were 3 working groups that were formed. We followed the same process that was done in the last general plan. So 3 working groups met following that survey in 2014, and between September, when they were formed, through May of 2016, the working groups have generated the first draft of these sections. The next is the planning board from when they became available, May through November 2016. The planning board reviewed those. In this case, this form is co-presented by the Open Space Committee and the planning board. So major sections of this have been reviewed by the Open Space Committee. When we look more at the process, you'll see why that's such a great way to do things. So it's been, since October, this past fall, it's been reviewed by a lot of different boards and committees, and now we're in this phase of public forums. These 2 months, January and February, we'll have forums on major sections, just like this, to present where we are and get comments. From February through March, we'll present those final goals and recommendations the goals and recommendations will be reviewed by various boards, and then in April, at town meeting, we'll present where we are with the process and the goals. We'll present the goals at town meeting. And then following that in May through October, we'll complete all the background text and work in the implementation plan, and that will be finalized in October of this year. So these are the working groups. There's 3 working groups: land use, built environment, fiscal, and economic. So land use covers natural resources, open space, recreation, historic, agriculture, and energy. And there's a lot of overlap with the different groups. They're all at different perspectives. The built environment includes the town center, housing and circulation, and fiscal, economic, an overview of where we are and sort of the implications of things. So these members, these folks in town, have worked in the working groups to create these first drafts. And I think this is as I mentioned, this is a great example. This forum on natural resources and open space, working with the Open Space Committee to make sure that that what's incorporated into the general plan is consistent with the open space and recreation plan. So the Open Space Committee has a plan, and it's so by working together, and in this case, co-presenting this forum, the plans are consistent. Another example is the new Housing Partnership Committee has been formed, and they're in the process of generating a housing production plan. And so that's got to be consistent with the housing section, and so forth with the other plans in town. So that consistency is a key part of that. The guiding principles, in order to make them consistent, we've got to start with the guiding principles. The working group spent quite a bit of time creating what seems to be very simple. And several of you here were on those committees, so you know that it seemed real simple. But it took a lot of discussion because there are a lot of different perspectives on the same subject. So I'm real proud of this summation of the guiding principles because so much work went into it to make sure that whatever we do in the general plan, and you should think about this while we look at this section, the natural resources and open space section, to make sure that we're following the guiding principles. So this is how it reads. Preserve Sherborn's most valued assets while working towards positive change. Real simple sentence. Preserve Sherborn's most valued assets: excellent schools, rural environment, farms and open space, historic assets, and scenic roads, while working toward positive change, the financial sustainability of the town, greater diversity of housing options, and a vibrant, attractive town center on a small village scale. So those are the guiding principles. They should be, all the goals that we talk about should be consistent with that. And then all the different pieces that follow that should be consistent, and it should be reflected in each major section. So here we are today talking about the natural resources and open space that includes the water resources, forest and biodiversity, scenic open space, and agriculture. That's what we're going to talk about today. The other sections that will be in the general plan, that will be covered in the general plan, include land use and zoning, housing, town center, and circulation, cultural and recreational resources, and fiscal and economic. They all overlay each other, they all interact, they all influence each other. So having those common guiding principles really helps that. The other thing, the next thing is, on the next slide, this structure has been key. Again, we spent some time creating this organization so that each section uses the same language, so that when you're using the general plan, you know where you are and where to look for things. So the organization is that the first level is the goals, the broad goals that are consistent with those guiding principles. And then to achieve those goals, we develop recommendations. We're going to look at these today. And the recommendations, the criteria, realistic and actionable, and they have to be guided by the goal. If we're making a recommendation, it's got to be to achieve a goal. And then what do you do with those recommendations? The strategies that are practical. They have to be practical to fulfill the recommendation, and then down to the details, the specific actions, the concrete and feasible. So they have to be feasible because the goal is to get all this stuff done. And if we can't get it done, we don't want it in the plan. And the key to that is really the implementation. The implementation has to be so that it can be resourced, so we know who's doing what and what assumptions were made. All that's got to be in the plan. So the implementation plan is going to include a time target, the leader, and who the leader has to collaborate with, the resources, both money and other resources. And those have to be defined for the goal level, the recommendation level, strategy level, and action level. And all these tables have to be developed and agreed upon by the boards and committees and organizations. It's not want it to be in the plan if the board that's either leading it or collaborating or the resources aren't there, then it won't work anyway. So all of these things need to be included in the implementation portion of the general plan. So I'm going to just run through the goals that we're talking about today. Now that we've got all the background and the structure, where we're going, the goals, there's 4 goals. The first goal is to maintain the quality and the quantity of Sherborn's water resources. Second is protect Sherborn's forests and biodiversity. The third is to protect Sherborn's scenic open space and rural character, and to promote retention and economic sustainability of agricultural lands. These are all real serious. They're all real important. And they've been condensed down, and they have a lot of detail. I'm going to ask Marion Neutra, my fellow planning board members, Marion Neutra and Neil Kessler, to go through these. And you've got your handout form, and if you don't, grab one. And we'll try to discuss the recommendations for each goal here and look forward to your feedback. So, Marion.
Thanks, John. So how this is going to work in this short time, we can't possibly present the long text that's included in all these goals, recommendations, strategies, and actions. It's many pages. So what we're going to do is focus on each recommendation that you have listed on your page. And rather than give you the whole text of the strategies and actions, I'm going to tell you what they are, rather informally. Tomorrow, probably tomorrow afternoon, Gino, right? We'll have the entire text posted on the town website. So just listen up tonight, get a feeling for what we're aiming for, and you can go and get the whole text if you want to tomorrow. But tonight, if you have comments right away, we'll try to find time to take a question or comment or two after each recommendation. We're not going to have a lot of time for each, so understand that we won't be able to hear everyone. But if you don't get heard, write your thoughts down in the blank space under each recommendation and leave the form at the end of the meeting, and I assure you we'll read every bit of it, so we appreciate that. Okay, so the first goal: maintain the quality and quantity of Sherborn's water resources. What do we want in 30 years? For water, it's pretty easy to say what we want. We want those water resources to be there, to be clean, to be abundant, and to sustain the town well into the future. That's easy to say, but when you get down to the challenges, it may be difficult to do. And we've built a lot of actions into the general plan because of that. We know very well, of course, that our water resources are vulnerable to contaminants from within the town, from our septic waste, etc., but also from new dense developments that are coming online. And the Board of Health, of course, is working very hard, and so is Concom, to prevent any mishaps or pollutions, but it's a challenge. We also share aquifers and wetlands with other towns, and we can't control what goes on over our borders. We don't have any comprehensive enough database to be able to start to try to map the crevices and cracks in the bedrock from which we pull our water from all different depths. It's a very complex water system we have, and no one has a map of underground. But we may try to get as much data as we can to be able to map them in the future, and we'll get to that. We don't actually have a policy on testing of water wells. Everyone has their own private well. And we don't have any reporting guidelines or policy. And then our streams and brooks and farm pond, they are monitored, we know that, but there's really not a long-range plan in how that should proceed. So let's get to what we think the general plan says we should do about it. The first recommendation that you have on your page is to compile existing information. Now, the Board of Health has information on all of our wells, at least those of the last 20 years or so. Correct me if the years are wrong, but the older wells, we have no idea. And these wells and the well data are actually not mapped in a two-dimensional, even surface map of the town. So as this fall, when some wells started to go dry, there wasn't an easy way to see the patterns. And then looking into the future, with the 3D computer modeling that's available these days, if we're able to gather data little by little as new wells come online over the course of 30 years, and with improvements and user-friendlier computer programs, we could make a three-dimensional map of the topography of the town in depth as well as area. If we had that, we'd be better positioned to predict what's going to happen next to a high-density development or in the face of climate change or drought. Okay, so that's the first recommendation. Now we have a choice here. We could take comments after each one, or I could run through all the recommendations and then we leave comments for the end. I think that might work better, making it, if anyone objects, raise your hand and say, I don't want to talk, but I think it might work better just to run through them, make a note of your thoughts, and we can come back to it. Does that make sense? Okay. The second goal, we'd like to be more ready to respond when threats to our water appear. A good example of this is the general chemical plant that basically the town has been scrambling ever since that pollution appeared to figure out how to deal with it. And, many committees have done a great job in that respect. But we're proposing that a groundwater protection committee should be reformed. We used to have such a committee. It should, of course, include the water commissioner, representatives from Board of Health, Concom, and any other group. And the charge of this committee, we should call it a consortium because we don't need more committees in town, but we do need to address this in the long term. They should design a regular testing program for long-term monitoring where it's needed. Now, private wells, we can't force people to report their private well data, but we can encourage it. And where people are near sites of pollution, we can facilitate it, provide kits, provide Board of Health agent to help with the testing. We need a long-term plan for monitoring the quality and quantity of Sherborn's creeks and brooks, farm pond, all the surface water. A lot of state agencies do that for some bodies of water, but we don't have a comprehensive plan. And then we need to work with neighboring towns to focus water testing near town borders and where problems are found. We need to work with neighboring towns because the sources of pollution often aren't within Sherborn, and we share aquifers, and we certainly share cracks in the bedrock with neighboring towns. So we should work with them also to raise awareness of problems when they occur with the Mass Department of Environmental Protection, the DEP, and the EPA. That's already being done for the general chemical plant. But I think now we're primed, and we should be primed in the future to act quickly when such things occur. And finally, we should maintain working relationships with state and regional authorities in order to have the personal relationships already in place when problems arise. Okay, so what about the next recommendation? This recommendation is just to keep track of how what our practices are in Sherborn. This is not necessarily changing rules or laws, but we should know what people are actually doing and try to keep track of that. The Board of Health and Conservation Commission are working hard to keep up to date with the latest technology for this. We should support them in that and continue to provide budgeting for consultants, courses, whatever they need. And we should make sure that the current practices of businesses, private citizens, and town officials are geared such that groundwater is protected, and that would include things like conservation practices, water collection and storage if needed, etc. Now, we have a new EPA stormwater management plan because it's mandated by the state, but most towns haven't implemented that yet. One of our hopes is that Sherborn will be a model community. We're one of the first to get ours done. We should be a model community in implementing it. And finally, we hope to continue to minimize salt use and maybe minimize salt use even more on Sherborn roads. Our next recommendation is to think long-term and plan for the long-term sustainability of these water resources. This is the most difficult thing. We can't predict future risks, but we can keep abreast of new developments and technologies and the science concerning water protection and conservation. New technologies like gray water systems, composting toilets. The Groundwater Protection Committee and Board of Health, etc., can study the applicability to Sherborn and promote those alternatives. In the long term, we need to protect those aquifers that straddle town lines. We'll continue to work with neighboring towns, but perhaps now form shared regulations so that their protections are as good as ours and vice versa. We should consider forming aquifer protection overlay districts where they're needed. And if it's needed, adapt new regulations to control groundwater pollution in those critical areas of town. We hope we could facilitate donation or acquisition of land that is crucial wetland, or even buildable land that's important recharge areas. Then there's the Farm Pond watershed. Farm Pond is we all know, the star player in our town. There's a very good farm pond management plan. We hope to help them enforce it with farm pond abutters, but also help abutters restore buffer zone space whenever we can. We also have an opportunity over the long term to balance our water needs with our housing needs by passing low-impact development zoning bylaws that would require that new construction of any kind, but particularly large construction, focus on the effect on groundwater recharge. The low-impact development guidance that's now well known is focused, in fact, on water recharge by limiting impervious surfaces, limiting lawns, and promoting natural vegetation. And then in the future, we might consider regulations specific for large construction projects. Now we have the 40B projects, which we have little control over. But for large projects that are not 40B in the future, I think there's still work to do to make sure that our water quality is sustained. And finally, the last recommendation is education and outreach. This is key to keeping water safe. There are lots of outreach and education programs out there. We might make them more accessible and promote them more in the town. The regional schools could promote student projects that focus on our local groundwater projects. We already have links on the town websites to maps that are very informative about wetlands and water resources, but those over in the future will be improved, and we need to keep those updated and keep the community engaged by using those maps in a more proactive way. So that is an overview of what we've proposed for water.
Can I jump up real quick for that particular section? So I'm on the Farm Pond Advisory Committee, and as you were running through everything, I kept obviously thinking about the pond. We're working on a surface water protection plan. We've been doing a lot of outreach to abutters. We've done education opportunities at the library fair over at Pine Hill. So I think wanted to just highlight that. Yes, we would love to make sure that we're partnering with you so we don't duplicate efforts unnecessarily, but actually learn from each other and work together.
Thank you. That's exactly what we want to hear. That's terrific. It's another example of where committees and the planning board need to be on the same page. We need to know what you're doing, so keep doing it, and we'll talk.
I think also, I'm Jackie Martin. I also sit on Farm Pond Committee, and Tom Trainer has helped us with water quality testing for the pond. That's another initiative that we're involved in, and trying to get it regular and have more people trained to do that piece too.
That's great. Tom was on the committee that put the draft together, and he did a great job. So, good comment. Well, if you think of more things, please write them down. We want to hear. And I'll turn the mic over to Neil, who's going to address goal number 2.
Hi. All right. So, is this goal number 1 or 2?
Oh, sorry, I was going, oh, sorry. Okay. Oh, okay, I forgot something. I was going to show you why we didn't show you all the details. This is the detailed, this is the detailed text under just one of the recommendations I just talked about. I couldn't fit it on one slide. So we went through these things, and you don't need to read this, but I just wanted to impress on you why we're doing it the way we're doing it. Okay, great. So I can run through these. There we go. Okay.
Great, thank you. One thing I just wanted to actually add to what Marion was saying, it just relate, I'm a little bit of a 40B nerd, and so I read court cases at night about how things proceed on 40Bs and ways that towns can counteract some of the things they might not want. And so just one thing I wanted to say about the general plan is that the general plan actually matters, and it matters even in 40B projects. So what the town is trying to do, as long as it's reasonable and sort of constitutes what they call a valid local concern, it actually can be used even in appeals that go through the housing, what is it, HAC, I can't remember what it stands for. Housing Appeals Committee, which is sort of what 40B appeals go to once they leave the local town. They do take into account what the general plan says, so it's even more important that we get this stuff detailed, what we're trying to do, put some good, valid justifications for it, because it matters in terms of, like I was reading a case recently in Barnstable where they wanted to do a 40B out on in some area right on the water where it was zoned only for marine uses, and you know, the typical thing is, oh, a 40B can bypass those kinds of things, but in appeal they actually found that the marine uses were a valid local concern that outweighed the regional need for affordable housing. So this stuff matters, not only for our future, but even for things that we may feel are less in our control. So, okay. So, speaking of defining some of that stuff, we'll move on to goal 2. So, the second goal is protecting Sherborn's forest resources and biodiversity. So, the overarching goal is what it says, and the vision is there, which we want to maintain healthy and abundant woodlands, wildlands that are biodiverse, that are rich in wildlife, and also as climate change becomes more of an issue and more of a reality, we want our woodlands and our forests to be resilient to those kinds of changes as temperature increases and other things that go along with it. Is it this? Thank you. So one thing that we put into this slide is you can see that in addition to doing things like water purification and storage and carbon dioxide sequestration, having forest cover actually keeps it cooler here. So if you can see where Sherborn is right here, and you can see places that are more built up, the temperature on the ground is quite different. So here's Farm Pond, and we were just looking at the map and realizing that right down along here is Western Avenue. These little sections here are town center, so you can actually, there's a visible sort of cooling effect from having forest, so it's something that's really important to preserve. So what are the challenges to preserving forest resources and biodiversity? One is that we don't know as much about them as we would like to know. We don't have a lot of information on townwide forest cover, biodiversity, invasives. We have sort of on-the-ground reports and that kind of stuff, but there's nothing coordinated. Another thing is that there is a rapid spread of invasive species that are threatening native ecosystems. What are we going to do about that? And then a lot of, or most of, Sherborn's forested areas are privately owned and most often unprotected. As housing developments go forward, and especially if they're not coordinated with these kinds of sort of ecosystem health and biodiversity in mind, forests can become fragmented, which leads to loss of resilience. Species don't do well as you sort of reduce the, if you reduce the size of a piece of forest and a particular species can't cross the divide between, then their populations can be impacted negatively. And then the last is the town also doesn't have any sort of long-term forest management plan for public or private lands. So we have a series of recommendations. And I guess the first thing, because the first challenge is we don't really know what we have, the first recommendation is to learn and know what we have. We want to create a comprehensive inventory of all the forested and open land, and then also include in that inventory information on forest composition, biodiversity, habitat connectivity, invasive species, all that kind of stuff. And there's a bunch of things that we can do sort of within there that we're recommending. The first is that we want to look at these different kinds of lands that we have in town and try to prioritize the conservation values for them, both town-owned and private. So we want to look at, privately owned land that has like conservation restrictions and look at the conservation values being protected there. We want to look at town forest land, conservation land, these sort of town-owned lands, and what are their conservation values. Another designation is Chapter 61 properties. What are the conservation values there? And then for the lands that don't have any protection at all, we still want to sort of apply the same filter or understand in the same way what's going on for the conservation values that we have for the town. To that end, we want to create a map and a database of town-owned and private land, and we want to include a whole bunch of information on it. In fact, on the Conservation Commission, we just initiated a little bit of a project where we're starting to map some of this stuff, where we want to have total area of natural landscape, including forest cover, meadows, all that kind of stuff. We want to understand just what the proportions are between privately held lands and public lands. We want to also put in there a description of the broad forest characteristics, tree composition, presence of rare species, vernal pools, just basically take an inventory of what's going on out there and how it relates to each other so we can have a good understanding of what the ecosystem is so that we know how to best protect it. The next recommendation that we've got is protecting critical undeveloped forest lands, specifically private lands. So, how are we going to go about doing that? So one of the things that we want to do or recommend is developing a proactive strategy, not only for maintaining Chapter 61 protection for privately held lands, but then also creating opportunities for ourselves to maybe add permanent protection through some sort of town ownership or some other designation when lands are coming out of Chapter 61 protection, because it's not a permanent thing. It's just something you can do, and there's tax benefits, and it keeps the land in a certain way. But when it comes out of protection, the town has a right of first refusal. So they could either buy land or try to work with a nonprofit to get more protection. So the way that we recommend doing that is, or sort of working on that issue, is trying to keep the boards and communities informed in changes in Chapter 61 status. We want to encourage the Land Acquisition Committee to develop a prioritized list of Chapter 61 lands, and then also come up with a funding strategy, because none of this can happen without money, to negotiate partnerships for the town to exercise that right of first refusal. Another element of protecting private lands is working with private landowners, because sometimes people don't really understand what their options are. A complaint you hear about 40Bs is that, well, what else do I do with my land? So we want to try to educate people about what they can do. So we were talking about sort of implementing outreach programs for owners of high priority lands that are in Chapter 61 protection, maybe negotiate conservation easements for people, then also look at lands that are privately held, but they're within sort of state designated areas that have sort of an elevated level of value. So we have natural heritage and endangered species designated lands, so they'll sit inside what they call priority or estimated habitats for rare and endangered species. Honestly, I think it's like 30% of the entire town is within these habitats. So if you were to ever actually do something, you have to go to natural heritage and get approval and all this kind of stuff. So we want to encourage people's just awareness of what's going on. And then also there's other designations that aren't regulatory, but that have been designed to help towns plan, such as Biomap 2 has this thing called core habitat. We have some of that in town. There's also things called habitats of potential regional or statewide importance. So we really just want to educate about what's out there and what people can do and pay attention to. And then the last thing as far as this recommendation would be to revise town bylaws and regulations to be consistent with the goal of protecting persistent with the goal of, I'm losing my place here, sorry, protecting the health and resilience of the forest and ecosystem. So One of the ways we can do that is through zoning. We want to establish updated open space and low-impact housing as preferred alternative for multi-dwelling projects. And then also require an analysis, a little bit of an analysis of forest and habitat connectivity that it needs to be considered whenever you're doing site plan review. Then the next recommendation is to develop an ecosystem management plan for public lands to maintain forest health and biodiversity. So what we really want to do is lead by example on public lands. So we're asking private landowners to sort of do their part and sort of learn about it, and we're going to help with that. But also we want to show what we can do in the same kind of way on public lands. So one of the things we're recommending is creating a plan to coordinate activities and goals of all the multiple committees and groups in town that are concerned with ecosystem health. There's a lot of them. A lot of times they don't, just sort of each committee doesn't know what the other's doing. So we really want to try to coordinate their activities. One of the recommendations is creating a position of a land and resources manager who could kind of be sort of the hub of the wheel. And then we can also clearly define responsibilities and relationships of the committees and groups to each other. Then there's also recommendations that we're going to make to adopt various land management practices. For example, Sherborn Land Management Task Force guiding principles, trustees of reservation guidelines, and a bunch of other stuff that we can do. And then we also want to provide the land manager and these responsible committees with the authority and resources to monitor public forest conditions, to go out when cutting activities, make sure everything's in compliance with best forest management practices, all these kinds of things. And the other thing we wanted to do is encourage a land manager or town forest committee or conservation commission members and the rest to actually go out and go to continuing education events so that they're up to speed, so that that kind of information, their education can filter down to people sort of on the ground with both public and private lands. Control and minimize the spread of invasives, looking at pollinator habitat, focusing on that, making sure that people understand just kind of what goes into it, being able to recognize pollinator habitat, how to preserve it, how to restore it, all those kinds of things are important. And then last thing, of course, again, goes back to money, which is for all of these things, we want to develop a land management funding strategy for all of this stuff. Because right now there's no Community Preservation Act funds, there's none of this stuff, so we need to come up with some mechanisms how we can fund preserving this kind of forest richness and biodiversity. Then the last recommendation is educate, right? So we want to implement public outreach programs for private landowners. We want private landowners to employ sound ecosystem management practices and approaches, minimize hardscapes, don't put in a lawn for lawn's sake, only do it if there's a need for it, so actually maybe reducing that. And then educate Sherborn residents about biodiversity and ecosystem resilience by advertising educational opportunities, because there's a lot of good groups, not just at the local level, but also at the regional and state level that offer a lot of education. Harvard Forest, Trustees of the Reservations, and Mass Audubon. Then we can support programs such as Conservation Connections, and let's see what else. Encourage Sherborn citizens with special expertise to do lifelong learning sessions or publish things in papers, that kind of stuff. And then lastly, speaking of education is starting young. We want to work with teachers to include some of this information in practices in schools and learning modules in schools. So environmental education is a big thing, and if we start kids young, especially when it's local and they know what it is, we think it'll have a really positive effect.
Do we have comments or questions about Goal 2?
I just have
Robin?
I like C a lot, and I was looking back at number 1, and would D be where we could place akin to C for the health of our rivers and streams and brooks? I know the brook that runs behind
Sorry,
our house.
can everybody hear, or
I have
we have a-
goals, so.
we have maybe use a microphone and blast out your cold? It's being recorded, we want to make sure everybody hears.
Okay. I like C where we're maintaining the forest health And so do we have something akin to that for our rivers and streams in section 1?
Actually, there is.
Is
Yeah,
that
I went through it so fast. It would be, hold on. It would be in B, actually B and C probably. Part of readiness to respond is to know exactly the condition of our creeks and streams now, so that when there's a change in quantity or quality, we'll recognize it. That's part of kind of a management plan.
And I think also when this section came before the Conservation Commission, we talked about, there was a lot of emphasis on forest because there's a lot of forest. But really, the goal really is to talk about, is to sort of promote biodiversity in general. So even though forests are kind of a sort of a linchpin of the discussion, the waterways, meadows, fields, all of that stuff is going to be things that we want to include.
And that's a good comment though, Robin, because the open space and forests that we, mostly kind of take for granted here are crucial for water recharge, so they can't be separated from the water. So, next goal. I have to run through this because we forgot to.
All right. So I think of goals 2 and 3 as being complementary to each other. When you study environmentalism, there's often a split that goes between kind of, I guess, biological or ecological, which is sort of this physical landscape and the science behind it, and things that aren't necessarily particularly human, although the human factors in there. And then there's what they call the cultural, and so what is the meaning of the land to people, and what values does it have just as a kind of an intrinsic value for humans living there. And so this third goal is about preserving Sherborn's rural character and scenic beauty by protecting open space. We look back at that first slide where we showed the heat map, and Sherborn really is a desirable place to be. It's unspoiled natural landscape and open space. There's a connection to nature, a well-being that goes along with it. I know that every single time I cross the border, and partly because it's like there's a change in the land that happens. Like I come in from Natick and boop, I'm right there at Coolidge Street, and all of a sudden I'm like, I can relax. And we recognize that that's a real resource for the town, and we want to do something to preserve it, sort of. And there's a lot of overlap with ecology, because if you're protecting the ecology, you're probably protecting sort of open space and the thing that makes people feel good or like makes it a desirable place to live. But there's things that we can do specifically around this. So what are the challenges? Same as before, most of Sherborn's open space and scenic lands are privately owned and unprotected. And Chapter 61, as I was referencing before, it's a tax designation, and it can be lifted. So things are not permanently protected. Conservation easement is permanent, but a Chapter 61 designation is not. So we're always looking for that place where we can sort of jump across, but that's one of the challenges, jump across from Chapter 61 to something more protective. And then current incentives for low-impact development or conservation, they're really insufficient at the moment. We don't really have a whole lot there for it. So, recommendations. It's a very similar thing. The first thing we want to do is, thank you, we want to identify and prioritize crucial parcels of privately owned open land.
You can just run through the recommendations and then go back. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's just push them here.
Okay, go.
I'll show you.
That's fine. So just go through each of these. So the second being working toward protection of private open lands that are identified and prioritized. And the first one, encourage development strategies that preserve open space and cultivate public support for preservation of open space and viewscapes. And that's it. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what we did. That's what we missed before. Got it. Okay. Prioritizing crucial parcels of privately owned land. So we want to basically identify high-priority private parcels through a collaborative effort that involve all these existing committees we've been talking about, organizations, interest groups that are concerned with open space and conservation. So we want to prioritize lands based on these following things: linkage of outdoor recreation and open space such as trail connections or potential pedestrian connections to the town center. We're recommending that we try to protect properties that complement adjacent conservation land. We're recommending scenic and historic landscapes and viewscapes be preserved, and then also farms that are important to the town's rural character. And for all of those kinds of parcels, we want to evaluate the feasibility and the mechanisms for protection, so we want to understand how we can do it, and then develop an appropriate strategy to go ahead and do that. And then also just, an important part of that is going to be maintaining active communication amongst these sort of relevant groups. As we said, like historically, there's not necessarily a lot of communication. We really want to make sure that that's emphasized. So the second one is working toward protection of private and open lands that are listed in A above, in this first one above, yep. So again, we have to develop funding strategies and partnering mechanisms to empower the town to exercise that transfer, the right of first refusal. So high priority Chapter 61 lands, we want to be there and ready to protect those places if we think they're of some value for this particular goal. And we want to acquire key parcels by development rights or by gift, conservation restriction, or purchase. We want to explore all the options, basically. And then we want to explore grant opportunities for acquisition as well. So the third recommendation we're making is encouraging development strategies that preserve open space. So one way to do that is to proactively cultivate relationships with crucial parcel landowners and explore alternative zoning strategies. And then we want to also inform owners of larger tracts of unprotected land of subdivision options that favor open space preservation. So, like, one of the things we talk a lot about on planning board is cluster housing, and the idea behind it is you make a dense impact in one spot, but then you allow yourself to preserve a lot of open space around it, rather than just sort of dotting structures around. Another way that we can do that is to revise zoning bylaws to favor open space subdivisions rather than conventional subdivisions, low impact development, and site plan criteria that value preservation and scenic viewscapes. We also want to adopt things like dark skies, where we're keeping the lights pointed downward and that kind of stuff as part of our site plan review for all new construction. And then I think the last one is just cultivating public support for the preservation of open space and viewscapes. And people really do focus on that now, but we just want to educate the public about the importance of protecting this stuff for the long-term maintenance of Sherborn's unique character. It's nice to want to do that, but the thing is you can go through a development process over a long period of time that doesn't account for it, and then all of a sudden you don't have as much of it as you want, or the character of the town changes. So we want to organize public programs, provide links on the town website, use town-wide events such as, Conservation Connection, just ways to get word out about how we can go about preserving these things for the long term. And then utilize existing communication tools to encourage the public to explore and appreciate town's open space. I know when I first got to town, somebody stuffed in my mailbox a photocopy of all the trails. It was just my neighbor, But, we like to sort of make more of a concerted and coordinated effort to do that kind of stuff. Encouraging citizen volunteerism to further enjoyment and maintenance of open space. And that's it.
I should mention that at a subsequent forum, we're going to be talking about the recreational uses of open space. It's a very important aspect of open space that we don't have time to deal with tonight. That'll be on another day, so come back for that. Are there comments or questions for Neil? I guess you all think it's a good plan. Yeah, preaching to the choir. Okay, well, the last goal that we're going to tell you about tonight is relating to agriculture. Most of us agree we'd like to keep farms in Sherborn, and the state certainly agrees that they want to keep farming alive in the state. The vision for this goal is in 30 years we'll still have sustainable working farms and agricultural open spaces that are valued and recognized as integral to the town's semi-rural atmosphere, healthy environment, and historic legacy. So, we all know our major farms. What we don't know is that Sherborn has a lot of small farms and private agricultural activities that are really not appreciated. At least the extent of them is not appreciated. So that's a challenge we'll get to. But as far as the commercial farm businesses that we have, their continuity depends on the commitment of younger generations to the farming lifestyle. And I can tell you in Sherborn, it's a very tough lifestyle. It's not easy to keep a farm alive in Sherborn. Land is expensive, and farm labor is hard to come by, partly because there's no low-cost housing for them. The economic sustainability is impeded by regulatory restrictions on alternative uses, and that, in my interviews with the farm businesses, was a major point. Current local zoning bylaws don't permit creative development strategies when a farmland needs to be developed. They're private properties after all, that balance housing with preservation of agricultural land. We could be more proactive on that front. So here are the goals that we recommend. I'll run through them quickly and then we'll take them one at a time. First of all, the extent of agriculture in Sherborn is nice. We like having the farms that provide us with local food and an atmosphere. They contribute to our rural atmosphere. But there's more than just the commercial farms that contribute to the rural atmosphere. There are many small farms that also make a big contribution. How are we going to support the long-term economic viability of the agricultural businesses that we have? We want to be able to work with farmers to develop strategies for retaining land use for agriculture, for all the environmental and cultural reasons that Neil talked about. We want to adopt regulations that actually promote preservation of agricultural uses. And knowing that there may be some development, we want to limit development and allow alternative uses. And finally, we'd like to enhance, I can tell you that the farm business owners would like to enhance the appreciation of the contributions that agriculture makes to our community. So we'll take these one at a time. First of all, why map all agricultural lands? The Massachusetts Agricultural Commission already has a map of the farm businesses in Sherborn. But what they don't have, and we don't have, is a feeling for the tremendous number of small agricultural activities that are scattered throughout the town, and there are many, many of them, non-commercial, small-scale, backyard horse barns, chickens, orchards, bees, llamas, alpacas. I mean, you can think of many examples yourself. And why do we want to know what we have? Well, partly to raise awareness, because they are important to the rural character of the town, even the non-commercial ones. And they could be better promoted to increase property values and the desirability of Sherborn as a place to live. So I guess I finished all that I had to say about that recommendation. The second one is, how are we going to support the long-term viability of Sherborn's existing agricultural businesses? First of all, we have to make sure that any regulations passed at town boards consider the potential impact on working farms. We've suggested there might be a yearly forum of town boards and committees with the Agricultural Commission and the farmers, just to hear their concerns and their needs. For all of the recommendations here, we might consider a expansion of the Agricultural Commission membership to play a more active role in town, if that's what's needed. Many towns, including Lincoln, for example, allow farmers to take a long-term lease on town-owned public open space lands. Now, we know there are some that we wouldn't want to be farmed, but there may be some that could be leased to expand the possibilities for some of our local farm businesses. Obviously, if that were done, we'd have to take into account open space values, trails, all the other values that we have on that land. It would have to be a balance. We could do better to promote local farms and encourage people to eat locally grown produce. This is partly a matter of publicity, but we'd encourage the farm businesses to market to regional restaurants outside of town and regional markets as well as local ones. They already do that, but there may be other ways that we can promote that. We don't do as well as we could at special events that highlight the importance of farming to our rural community, our semi-rural community, and our history. We have occasionally, every few years, a Grange Fair, which is a huge success, but some towns have a farm day and a fair every year. That's a big event, and everyone comes. We could do better at that. A big issue with everyone that I talked to in the farming community was that it's a big challenge for farmers is that their income is so seasonal, and the seasonal sale of things is quite limited, and they're fairly restricted in the alternative uses they can put their land and their facilities to in the off-season. We'll come back to this, but there have been some very creative solutions. I don't think Jonathan Hodson Walker's not here, but I don't think he'd mind me mentioning that he registered his farm with the Massachusetts Film Office as a potential location. And indeed, at least once it was used as that. And that sort of thing is an important potential source of income for farms that cannot possibly survive on the sale of their produce alone. We might consider forming a promotion committee that promotes Sherborn, but along with Sherborn Farms and the whole rural environment we have here, because it's really so unique in the Boston area. What about retaining land in agriculture? Some of the same strategies that Neil talked about for retaining open space for conservation and water and other uses are also applicable here. Open space or cluster developments, low-impact development strategies for new building, and what other zoning bylaws and regulations could be put in place to help the farms. One important one, back to the seasonal income problem, is we could allow a wider range of secondary uses of agricultural land here in Sherborn. And without making any specific recommendations, obviously they would have to go through all the boards and committees as usual. But things like accessory rental housing or retail sales or agritourism, small restaurants, other non-agricultural activities such as events. Other towns allow conferences. There's a wide range of things that could help keep our farms alive. And we can't decide here which ones would be most useful, but we can certainly consider them. And And then we could examine our bylaws and regulations to see if we can help the farmers find temporary housing for farm workers and interns. More than once it was mentioned that there are free interns available through a agricultural promotion education program in Massachusetts, but when the interns learn that there's no housing, they don't come, and there's no such program in Sherborn. What kinds of regulations could promote preservation of current uses? Oh, I just talked about that, didn't I? Okay, so the last recommendation is to enhance appreciation of farms in Sherborn by engaging the public. Some of that we already mentioned, but we could, like all the other things in natural resources and open space, work with the school committees to bring students into the realities of farm life, and they have an opportunity here in Sherborn to see it firsthand. There are educational programs that would be good for all Sherborn residents on the science of sustainable farming, the history of farms in Sherborn. And finally, we could create community gardens. Many of us have plenty of space for gardens, but many of us don't. And especially now that we have more multi-unit housing for over 55 people in the center of town, community garden could be a very viable alternative to bring people back outside and allow them to grow their own food. There are lots of ways to do it. Other towns have done it, and we can use guidance from other towns to make it happen here in Sherborn.
Okay. Any comments or questions about this section or any of the other sections?
I was going to add that the community garden, I think, would be an asset. We all have, most of us have land to garden, but that sometimes can be lonely, and having the community art aspect is something the town lacks, to get to see neighbors from all over town, and then we could even sell some of it, not what we can't use, we could also give to others or donate or sell and just continue Sherborn's voice as a farming, one aspect of our community.
That's an excellent idea.
A few. Go ahead, Susan.
I just wanted a definition of low-impact development. That's not a term I'm familiar with. What can you sort of...
I'll try. Help me, John.
Well, Audubon actually has been championing this with a state grant, but I think Audubon, is championing this. It's low-impact development, and the idea is to protect the environment, enable development, but protect the environment. So it's things like porous pavers, it's things like the road width, and things like that reduce the amount of surface. A lot of it's stormwater is a bigger and bigger issue. Stormwater is just a way of accelerating surface water to getting from the sky to rivers and the bays, and instead of percolating through the ground. So if we reduce the amount of impervious surface by clustering houses, by making, if the houses are closer or businesses are closer, that reduces the amount of pavement. Things like that.
Okay, so it sounds like a lot of it could be, wouldn't necessarily have to be built into the zoning bylaw, but it could be planning board regulations about smaller things.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had a grant from Audubon to evaluate our regulations and zoning bylaws and compare them to the ideal, or see what could be done. And we've got the planning board has on its agenda, it'll be in another section of the general plan, to look at an open space protection type of bylaw that would cluster houses closer together and permanently conserve more open space. We haven't had development in a long time, but there's a lot in the being discussed, so it's a timely time to do that.
This will be instead of the cluster zoning we already have in place?
We have a cluster zoning that's never been used.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
Right, but our open space zoning bylaw at present is not a true cluster zoning bylaw. It allows, one house per acre, and it doesn't preserve large tracts of land. The cluster housing, true cluster housing bylaw would be it is part of low-impact development strategies. It's part and parcel of it.
Sure. Thanks.
Good question. There are a couple over here.
I think it's an excellent idea that you suggested to keep the Board of Health and Conservation abreast of what you're doing, because the right and left don't know what's happening. You have excellent ideas, especially for farms. I own a small horse farm in the neighborhood that's being cut off because of the Board of Health or Conservation, because I want to improve it or do something. And all your suggestions are excellent for what my land would be, but then you turn around and the Board of Health says yes. So these are great ideas to have meetings with them, to get them on this also, with the farms and going forward with being able to help the small farmers in town.
Well, thanks for that comment. Actually, we have taken this to the Board of Health and discussed it with them in detail, and they've made comments. I think no matter what is implemented here, it still will have to follow water protection rules of the Board of Health. So we're not proposing anything that would contaminate groundwater here. The Board of Health rules would still apply.
And please, do not make our roads any more narrow.
I guess I just wanted to voice some support for C and D. I just observed that for all the lovely farms in town, we're not terribly creative or innovative in our use. Right? I mean, there aren't very many weddings in town. There aren't pop-up farm-to-table restaurants. There aren't more commercial uses of farm properties. There aren't corn mazes. Right? I mean, it's a silly example. I understand, but we're pretty notable for having almost none of these things. And I think there are some. I think whether it's the Board of Health that has been. I mean, I'm completely for protection of groundwater, but there needs to be some give and take in order to support the farm businesses in town, even when they're not the primary source of income for the family that owns the farm.
Robin?
Have you thought of any, I've done some research about developments developed around farmland. Some people, they don't farm the land, but they want their children to see a working farm. It can be high-end housing, but if we're fearing that we may lose a plot of farmland, this is a way to retain it, as well as have some development.
Yeah, there's
lots of articles on examples throughout the country of these kind of developments around a farm.
Yeah, so if a farmer's got some land and they want to sell some for development, there's more that could be done with what we have, and there's work being done elsewhere to provide a compromise so that it allows development, but it also permanently protects the farm, permanently conserves it. So there's things now that enable that, but there's work that can be done, and we can look at our zoning bylaws that would make that more specific. Would probably provide that. It's up to the individual landowner if they want to do that.
But I know it's not that the farmer wants to farm, that they can't unless so they can continue to farm. The residents or the children can help the farmer. You can do as little or as much as you want, but it's part of your life living on this farm. It's kind of a new way of development the last decade or so.
Yeah, that's been used quite a bit in the Midwest where farms tend to be bigger.
Virginia, this is a couple of years ago when I was researching them, but they're not always way out.
No.
Suburbs of Virginia.
Not indicated tonight, but the planning board and the town has a long-standing zoning bylaw that allows cluster zones. It has not proven to be popular to developers, and as some have seen in the Holliston development by this pond over at this, just down the line on Mill Street, that was a slow seller. So it's on the books, you're going to chase it, be careful, go out there and make sure that it really is marketable. If you're up against a 40B, the developer wants to push for maximum, not just a compromise, reduced zoning for each home versus opening more space. It's easy, it's dreamlike, it's attractive, but look at what's on the books. Maybe it's got some serious weaknesses, but I don't think at the time it was thought so. They haven't proven to work in a couple times. All right, thank you.
The only thing I'd say, and just to respond to that, is the town's been terrible about being not terrible. They have on TV. No, but the town has been loath to be proactive about trying to find compromise affordable housing developments. So I think one of the things that certainly the Housing Partnership is looking at, what I would like to do, is to try to get the town to be a little bit more proactive about that kind of stuff and maybe leverage these kinds of things so you can have a friendly 40B of some sort or another. So that's where it could come into play as well if the town becomes a little more involved in trying to chart its own course through affordable housing.
Yes.
So what's the follow-up? I know you mentioned you were planning on having a couple more hearings. I mean, this is obviously super comprehensive, well thought out, and all of the work that you folks and whoever else has been involved, clearly shows because it's so comprehensive. Other than the public hearings, let's pretend for fantasy's sake that what you've laid out is what is going to happen and all the feedback is great and maybe there's some tweaks, and then what?
Well,
What happens now?
yeah, you can go to the slide on timeline, but the real thing is the general plan gets written, but then it's got to be used. So things like changing a zoning bylaw, that has to be something that the town decides at town meeting and requires 2/3 vote. So any action here is something that has to go through the normal process. The general plan doesn't dictate or make policy that is implemented. The town has got to implement it through the normal means of doing that. Whether it's a regulation that a board may control or bylaw changes that have to go through the normal process. So, and everything that, a lot of things we're talking about require allocation of resources like money. So we're entering that phase now for this town meeting with advisory hearings, where each board and committee comes up with what they think they need, the departments in town, all that stuff goes through and gets approved at town meeting. So all this is the plan that should help steer that, but the process, the plan is only as good as it's used, and that's where please come to town meetings.
So will you be like soliciting volunteers? I mean, I'm thinking actually selfishly about the Pond Advisory Committee, and a specific example would be the surface water protection plan, mostly because on our committee, as Jackie knows, I'm the one who's going to be following up on that. So I would love to be working with this group so that we could work together.
Well, I think that's the input we want. We want to make sure that the general plan for the town has what people in town want in there, and then when it goes to the selectmen, that they refer to it when they're making a decision. In some cases, it's going to be where do we put our resources and that sort of thing. In some cases, when your committee comes and says, we need some funding for this, and it's in the general plan, that's got to be an asset in making the decision.
So we're going to you, you're not coming to us. Maybe that's
Well, both ways, I hope it's both ways. I mean, what you've just heard has gone through to 10 different boards and committees so far. And that's the process. So we come to you, but come to us, as you are now.
Yeah, actually, I should apologize that we haven't had a meeting with Farm Pond Advisory Committee. I did send an email alerting someone on the Farm Pond Advisory Committee, I thought it was the chair, to a hearing on all of what we're talking about tonight. I believe it was the Board of Health meeting that I invited someone to. I'm not saying you because it may not have been you. So I didn't follow up on that email, and no one came to the meeting. So, but it's not too late. We're still working on
And you
this.
just made, it's now we've now heard your message. So I mean, seriously, that's why we're here. And I hope that's why you're here, because now we have someone who knows we need to do something more.
If I can add to that also, just briefly, I think of it as like when you look through kind of these recommendations, there are places where you say, oh, that's a planning board thing, or there's places where you say that's a conservation commission thing. So there's definitely a little bit of initiative that's going to happen probably on both sides. Like right now, the conservation commission is looking to revise a little bit its regulations, and it's very much in keeping with the two sections that I covered, especially the first one, where we're looking a little bit more sort of cohesively, or holistically, I should say, at what wetland ecosystem health means and how that relates to water resources in the general plan, how it relates to forest biodiversity in the plan. So I think it's just going to be hopefully a synergistic process between different groups, interested groups.
And when we get to the point of really filling in these implementation tables, we're going to need the input and the collaboration of a lot of town committees, certainly the Farm Pond Advisory Committee as well. And as that happens, we'll probably, make some tweaks in the plan as we work that through.
I mean, a lot of these recommendations are great. I'm just a little concerned about the outreach, both in terms of communication I have a lot of neighbors who are totally disconnected from the second. And, there must be more ways to communicate. And then the issue is once you want to implement in terms of, especially the mapping and the inventory of things in the town, you're going to need a lot of volunteers. And it seems to me that there's potential in the town that's not being tapped. People, would be willing to donate some time. And so it's not always a question of funding from the budget, the town budget, because you're always going to fight against limitations. But trying to get more engagement and more volunteering from the town, and also high school students perhaps. There's summer, there are a lot of high school students and they want summer projects. And could the funding possibly be outside of the budget, meaning you could develop some kind of that people could contribute to fund for volunteers, like high school students during the summer, something like that, just thinking of other ways to communicate and other ways to engage people in the town. Because I think, these recommendations are great. It's just a matter of getting the information out there.
That's an important comment. Thank you very much. I mean, that's the more thoughts that you can share with us on those lines, the better. Come to the meetings.
It seems like such an active plan, and I know a lot of these plans, they're mandated, they have to be revised, and then they just gather dust on a shelf until they have to be done again, and you put together such a good plan, and as my neighbor here says, we need to involve townspeople in this to make them aware, and I could help do something with that, or that piques my interest. But if it's just in Gino's office, people are not going to come in and look at it. So
That's a great
some kind of PR, or have a Sherborn general plan day, or so. I don't know how to do it. Make it fun, have it on a farm, and get people active, or it's just going to be closed till the next 11 years. Sort of.
Councilman Paluso. Roger.
I've been working on town water for a number of years, and I'm really glad to see you get down all those things they ought to be doing. And probably thought all one time or another, but kind of ignored. There's an awful lot of work that really needs to be done if we want to know what's going on. And just for perspective, if you go through and estimate how much water actually gets used and doesn't go back in the ground, you can take care of a whole town with 1 inch of rain out of 45. The problem is, the use is not where the permeability is. So there's scattering of capacity versus use that we can't define yet because we haven't done all this mapping to figure out how all this stuff connects. It's a very difficult problem.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's, if we don't set the goals and start working towards it, we won't figure out how to solve that problem. But climate, weather changes, if we've got periods of drought and periods of heavy rain that are going to change, and if there's housing development that will change the water use and the challenge to our groundwater, we might be in some trouble. So, like every other town, we've got to figure this stuff out.
And one difficulty with our 40B thing is we're one of the few towns that was almost totally dependent upon small wells. And the regulations state 40B and so it doesn't take that into account. According to 40B, you can stick a straw in the ground anywhere and take all the water you want without any consequence.
A little generalization, but they are called mass general laws. So, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I'm not sure if I was clear enough about that farm development. It doesn't have to be an existing farm. If someone's selling, I need to sell my house, I don't want to go 40B, like this can be a use that you can create farmland out of this acreage and build this, and then they hire a farmer. Sometimes young farmers don't have money to have a home and farmland, and they want to come somewhere and farm. So I think that's how it's made. It's not just someone who has a farm and wants to sell it. It's creating more farms within the town, as well as having some housing.
Yep, okay.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to...
I think we're on the same page. Good. Well, thank you all very much. I mean, we've got some really great feedback. Let's see, we've got a housing production plan meeting scheduled for March
7th?
7th, I think.
I think 6th or 7th, yes.
Yeah, so we'll...
At the community center.
At the community center.
Yeah, at the community center. So, and we'll be publicizing the upcoming sessions. So again, thank you, everybody. Please be sure to hand in your forms. And if you borrow a pen, put it back, we need it for next time. Thank you.